Hello, everyone. Really glad to have you here. We're gonna allow people to arrive. Gonna give them a few more minutes, but would be really good if you can introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're from, what are you working on. One of the reasons why we do those events is also to create connections between all of you. So hopefully you can get a few valuable connections generally. So yeah, feel free to introduce yourself. We're going to start in a few in a minute or two. And the topic for today's session is going to be a little bit the topic of how to raise investors for your startup. I do want to say that not necessarily the investors, but what are the best cities to get those investors as well. That's going to be something that hopefully is going to be valuable for each and every one of you as you're making decisions about the place where you're interested to relocate, or where are the places with the best opportunities. While I'm doing this talk, feel free to also send questions via the QA. You have a Q&A button that you can use to ask us the questions. And yeah, basically, it's good to see that we have Maor here. He has an Israeli startup, so that's great. And we also have Kushik, that is a student writing a thesis on startup ecosystem. So hopefully today is going to be a good opportunity. We have David, of course, from Smedo from Germany. So we already have a few from people from all over the world. Feel free to continue introducing yourself. Let's talk a little bit about the investment, and once again, if you have any questions or comments in the chat, feel free to let us know. So that's the idea. So let me quickly share my screen, and we can start. So just a second. Okay, so once again, feel free, questions are welcome. We're going to talk about the best cities to find investors for your startup in this session. So my name is David, I'm the CEO of StartupBlink, and let me quickly tell you a little bit about the agenda for today. We're going to start with a very short introduction of StartupBlink, then talk about why location actually matters, why your ecosystem is so critical. I'm going to speak a little bit about the topic of investment, a little bit of a brief in order to really understand the tips and the practical steps we're going to give you on the top startup cities, where we have to figure out a little bit the psychology of the investors as well. Then we're going to proceed to Q&A, but feel free to write questions as they go. We don't necessarily need this to be structured. This presentation, by the way, will end with a much more interesting continuance, which is the pitching of actual startup ecosystems by those public sector entities and the governments. Each of them is going to try to persuade you participants to arrive and to relocate and to invest and to expand in their ecosystems. There are so many interesting locations in the world currently. So I hope those pitches are going to be useful for you to make decisions about where to go. A little bit about StartupBlink really quickly. You can see more in startupblink.com, but basically as a quick introduction, what we have is a global startup ecosystem map and a research center. There is a site, there is the map, there is also dashboards for each one of the cities, so you can dive deep into each one of the cities and see what's its current momentum, what are the strong industries, and so on. All of this is available for free. Then we also have communities in StartupBlink. We have about 40,000 people in our communities, and we are also ranking thousands of startup ecosystems around the world. So that's something that is very important for us, the ability to kind of tell you what are the best startup ecosystems that you should take into account as you're basically thinking about relocation and investment. I will also say that generally StartupBlink is also helping on research and policy advising to dozens of governments, other than just telling all of you what are the best ecosystems and what's the momentum of those ecosystems across thousands of cities. We're also helping in projects to building roadmaps for ecosystem development and so on. and doing some policy advising, training, and so on. And of course, we're also deploying ecosystem portals. We really think that each city should have an amazing, beautiful portal to celebrate its ecosystem, to improve the data flow. And that's something that we're building and keep on improving. Let's talk a little bit about, as a setup for today, why your location matters. So here's a very interesting graph over here that kind of like shows basically the bottom line over here. 49% of the world unicorns are based only in 5 cities. Unicorns are startups that are valued at above $1 billion. Half of them are based in five cities, and I think 41% of them are in top 3 cities. If you sum up the 24, 9, and 8, you're gonna see a very interesting number of 42, 41% that is basically only in 3 cities. Now the thing is that it's very interesting that the average IQ of people in those cities is not higher than the global average IQ. So it kind of makes you wonder why do cities that have only 1 or 2% of the global population have almost 50% of the massive startups that the world has? And the answer is that great startup ecosystems are a flywheel. They're basically keep on building success on top of success. So it makes a lot of sense to be in the ecosystems that are successful compared to the ecosystems that are not successful. Your chances of building something big are not the same. They are heavily dependent on the cities that you've picked to be. And the idea is as following: the right startup ecosystem allows you a few critical things for your startup. The first one is that investors are there. Basically, investors are conglomerating and arriving to only a few ecosystems. It's very hard to build a critical mass of an investment ecosystem. And for that reason, they cannot be in all the cities in all the countries. They are picking a few favorites. You have to really understand that. Other than the investment team, also the clients are there. People that are used to work with startups are there. Your co-founders, the people that are going to build the team together with you, are also there. Your suppliers are also there. The knowledge is there via meetups and so on. So that's the idea. Like, you're gonna have cutting edge knowledge about your startup ecosystem, and even as importantly, the emotional support is there. A lot of the work that we do in StartupBlink is discovering that many of the problems of cities and countries is the culture. The cultural element, just like a startup has, the startup culture is so critical. The culture of the city or the country, as in what are people views about building a startup? Will your family and friends support you in your struggle to build a startup, or will they tell you what are you doing, or judge you and so on? This is critical, and by putting yourself in the right place in the right city, you're greatly increasing your chance of being emotionally stable in this thing, instead of having an ultimatum or kind of like emotional pressure as well. So that's really important. The social life is also there. You're going to meet other startup founders all over the place. In many cities, there is no startup ecosystems. You're basically trying to, if you're going to try to meet people building startups, you're going to fail. In most cities in the world, there is no real startup ecosystem. There are only a few of them. So for all those reasons, it creates a situation that the really successful cities are have all those elements, and they greatly increase your chances of success. And it doesn't really matter if you're building a startup that is trying to get investors, or just bootstrapping a startup. It's going to be valuable in any case. However, I have to say, if you are building a startup that requires investors, the location is even more critical, because for a bootstrap self-funded startup, the social element is important, the emotional, the knowledge, the co-founders. But we talked before about how critical it is, like how scarce are actually investors. Surprisingly, people who want to give you money, or people want to give money, are more scarce than people that need money. So that creates a situation that they're only in a few locations. And you have to take this into account. Once again, the decision about where to be is critical. One of the conclusions that we always push towards in StartupBlink is that if you're in an underperforming ecosystem, either leave it or lead it. Just to explain on this, let's say if you're stuck in a city, and we're all sometimes the life circumstances sometimes ground us to a specific place, be in a situation that if you have decided that you have to stay in an underperforming ecosystem, be in a situation that at least you're trying to lead it, to generate those events, to connect the ecosystem together. That's going to be important, because you don't want to be a passive member of an underperforming ecosystem. So we're always trying to evangelize you girls and guys to kind of go out there and be in a situation that you're trying to basically build your ecosystem in case you can't relocate and improve it. So that's the thing. Good. So and once again, if you have any questions during this presentation, feel free. Good. Let's talk a little bit about some elements that you have to think of before you relocate on the location. So some of them would include, are you bootstrapping or going for investors? Once again, one of the most confusing points with startup entrepreneurs that we're talking with is that they're never sure if they're bootstrapping or going for investors. Not never. A lot of them are not sure. The good ones know. One of your decision as a startup founder would be to understand: do I need investor money, or can I pull it off on my own? That's going to be a very important decision. So that's something that we encourage you to take. Once again, if you are going for investors, the element of picking the right ecosystem is even more critical than before, because it's just critical. How much money would you need? That's also very, very important. Each ecosystem, if you have decided that you need an investor, each ecosystem basically has a different, let's say, ability to give you money based on the investment round. So the bottom line over here is that if you have evaluated that your startup is going to change the world and needs massive amount of money, you are much more advised to go to one of the top ecosystems globally. If you have decided that your initial sum of investment is not that massive, let's say if you've decided that you need 10 million plus, then of course one of the global ecosystems make a lot of sense. If you've decided that it's going to be enough for you 500,000 or 1 million, then you can downgrade a little bit your, let's say, the seed strengths that you're choosing. You no longer have to go to the top 10 and you can go below. But do know that if you are looking for investors, anything ranked in StartupBlink, and the ranking is open, you can see it, you can browse it, it's there. Anything ranked below 200 is already almost problematic on generally getting investment as a side note. So that's something that is important to say. So how much money do you need? According to that, you pick your city. What is your vertical? That's important, unrelated to investment, but basically each city is better in other verticals. If you're doing hardware and IoT, maybe Shenzhen or Odense in Denmark would be great, although generally they're not performing that great. So each city has specific unique advantages. If you're looking for fintech, London, New York are great ecosystems, Dubai, and not necessarily San Francisco. So based on your vertical, you also have to do a little bit of research. Cost of living, generally important, but of course, if you're trying to really make it something big, you have to go to the cities that have high cost of living, and that's a great price to pay. If you are bootstrapping and self-funding, of course, it makes sense to find an ecosystem that has low cost of living, so on. And introduction, can someone introduce you? One of the things that you want to do is hopefully not just arrive to a place clueless and start building your network, but have a few people that can already connect you to what you need. So those are a few elements that are important. The conclusion is that basically there isn't an ideal startup city. Although San Francisco is ranked #1 in the world, it's not an ideal startup city. There is only an ideal city for your startup based on considerations. I've given you over here 5 considerations. There are a lot more, of course, also depending on your own personal situation. But the idea is that we have to do some work on investing time into deciding on our city. And I think a lot of us are not doing that. One of the most important decisions that you're going to make is where are you basing yourself? And a lot of us are not putting enough effort into this very, very important question. So I just encourage you to think about it. And there are tools out there. The StartupBlink ranking is one of them. There are other tools as well. try to dedicate some time into it. So that's the idea. Once again, questions, Q&A button, because I'm not going to be able to necessarily track the chat if you have anything. A little bit of investor types, just for setting the ground correctly before I introduce the cities. The first type of investors is the three Fs. They are basically the family, friends, and some people say fools. I honestly don't think that there are fools in this definition. The family and friends backing up startups is a massive part of the success of startups in advanced ecosystems. I think that some investors, by the way, would also ask you, how come none of your family member or friends invested in you? And that's a valid question. Basically, if the closest people to you are, do not really see the potential here, why should I? So that's the first layer. The family and friends and fools, if you like to add it, they exist anywhere. And that's the beauty of it. However, I have to say that the more open-minded a place is, the more it is more successful on the startup level, the easier it's going to be for your friends and for your family to invest. Because if you're going to try to have your family invest in you, if you're in Greece, let's say, it's going to be more difficult than if you are in San Francisco or Tel Aviv and so on. Because basically there is clear track record of success and your friends and family would want to join the game. So by you starting a startup, they would say, here's a great opportunity. A person that I trust is starting a startup. So once again, everyone has as family and friends. A lot of them have money all over the world, but psychologically, you're better off asking for money from family and friends in locations where it is clear what is a startup than trying to explain to them the concept. Accelerators, also some of them, there are accelerators all over the world. Some of them are much better than others. The most known one is Y Combinator, but in the USA. There are a few others. A lot of them are in the USA as well. Some really good one in China as well. So the idea over here is that accelerator value does change based on the location. The better the startup hub is, the more serious and the high quality are going to be the accelerators generally. So you have to take this into account. Angel investors, those are the individuals, either individuals or syndicates that are interested in investing. Those actually exist in good quality ecosystems, in those that are ranked, let's say, from 1 to 200 in the world. It would be very hard to find an angel investor network of high quality and good and fair conditions outside of the top 200 cities, in many cases outside of the top 100 cities. And the last layer of the investor type is basically the venture capital, the VC. Those are the heavy, let's say, guns. Usually starting investing in something like $4 million, $6 million, $10 million for even seed rounds. They exist in the top ecosystems. You would not find them that much outside of the, let's say, top 100 or even top 50. It's going to be hard to find them when you go outside of the top 50. So something to think about. Once again, investors are focusing on a few cities in a few countries. They're not widespread around the world, especially if you're looking for the ones of high quality. So that's important to say. And that's a little bit the tragedy of ecosystems. They're feeding from their previous successes. So the idea is that the better the ecosystem is, the more fuel it gets to become better and become better, creating a massive gap between them and what comes after them. And that's something that we have to take into account. Investors are working with FOMO, with the fear of missing out. When they see a city that is generating a lot of high quality unicorns, they're going to join. Basically, that's the fun part of it. So the idea is that when a city is successful, for example, Israel, when people understood that Israel has a great ecosystem, a lot of investors started drifting to Israel. When they see success, they go there in a way. So that's something that is important. Okay, a little bit, this chart just gives you the picture. This is not an updated chart, but something to give you a little bit of an understanding about what's going on currently in the investor scene. You can see over here that most of the funds still for startups are arriving from our own, the startup founders, our own personal savings, and credit. So this is the situation. Um, a lot of it is arriving from family and friends, a tier that people are making fun of, and then see how little is arriving from the venture capital and the angel investors. The reason is that they're only focused on a few cities, basically. So they're not spread globally like our funds are spread globally because we're all over the world. And of course, our family and friends are all over the world. The venture capital and the angel investors are focused on very few cities and countries. So something to maybe think about. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the investor psychology just for a second. So the idea is that I do want to let you know that the professional investors are thinking a lot about they have a methodology called spray and pray, which is basically let's invest in 30 startups with the hope that one or two of them is going to become a unicorn and everything else is going to fail. So just for you to remember, before you are moving to one of those massive cities with a massive cost of living, trying to get investor, think about, can your startup be the answer to their prayers? If everything is going well, is your startup is going to cover their entire funds, all the failed, let's say, all the failed startups that they have in the fund? Someone has to back it up. So the idea is, in the best case scenario, can you back up the 28 that are failing? And if the answer is no, then better to relocate, maybe not to a massive city, and take it from there. So let's talk a little bit, before we introduce the top startup ecosystems, we're going to go over a few charts to really tell you where should you go. First of all, I want to tell you that when you check the types of the unicorns and startups that the city is producing, you would see that some of them are local and some of them are global. Local would be e-commerce for the local startup ecosystem, education for the local startup ecosystem, and so on, fintech for the local startup ecosystem. For example, you would see this in places like Shanghai, Moscow, Sao Paulo, and so on. The market is so big that a lot of those ecosystems are producing mostly local startups. So if you're not trying to target the Brazilian market, you can target the Chinese market anyway. But if you're going to Brazil and you're not trying to target the Brazilian market, it doesn't make much sense to raise investment, because over there, most of the investment will be for the local market. Some of the cities in the world are producing global startups. And those are the interesting ones. If you want to relocate and build a global startup, San Francisco, London, New York, Tel Aviv, those are the interesting ones. Let's go over the giants, which are the top 10 startup ecosystems. Over here, I would say with a caveat, some of them are global, some of them are local. My job here is to tell you which ecosystem should you go to if you're looking to build a global startup. San Francisco, without a doubt, massive difference from everything else. Still, if you're trying to conquer the world, San Francisco is the place to go. It's getting reduced. The total score gaps between it and the ones below are constantly getting reduced, but still, you can see a massive difference. New York, a great ecosystem on fields like fintech and so on. Beijing, a very closed ecosystem. If you go there, you only build for the local market, and if you're not Chinese, I would probably not do it. The same for Shanghai. Los Angeles, another great global startup ecosystem. London, an amazing global ecosystem. Boston, another one, especially in health tech and in other things. Tel Aviv, one more high quality global startup ecosystem. Moscow is a local startup ecosystem, generally producing things for the Russian market, and the same for Bangalore. So over here, we did a quick brief about what are the global ones and what are the local ones. Let's say in the time that we have left, maybe we can jump between regions and just tell you what regions are interesting generally. USA, North America is still the place to go. Let me repeat this again. USA is the place to go. On quality, there nothing matches. Nothing. You know the cities over here. I don't have to go that deep into it. San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, Boston. We talked about this. Seattle, Chicago, also great cities to build a high quality startup. Austin is more of a lifestyle ecosystem, but is growing and is very substantial. So it's there. A surprising one, but it's always there. Washington, D.C., San Diego, and Toronto, the Canadian representative at number 10 in North America, also a strong ecosystem. So that's the view for those ecosystems. As for Asia Pacific, this is the growing region, keeps on growing. There is a lot more money there every year. I do have to tell you that a lot of the cities that you see here, you have to build for the local market to be extremely successful. Mainly all the Chinese cities, the 4 Chinese cities that you see here in the top 10, only for the Chinese market. The Indian cities are also building for the local market, for the Indian market, and that's something that you have to take into account. Bangalore, New Delhi, Mumbai. Seoul is relatively global, but also a lot of local. Tokyo, the same, just like Seoul, the same profile, a little bit moving into the global, but also a very strong ingredient on the local ecosystem. Honestly, the only one over here that is very, very global and interesting is Singapore. So that's a very open ecosystem. There is a small market size, so they have to build globally. A little bit on Europe. London, the queen of the European ecosystem. Moscow is a relatively closed ecosystem focused on a very big Russian market, just like the one in the Chinese market, but much more open to Chinese. Let's hope it stays this way. Paris, Berlin, 2 global ecosystems, also catering for the local market, but strong ecosystem. Stockholm is one of the most growing ecosystems, and this one is truly global because the Swedish market is too small to create local innovation. The same goes for Amsterdam. It's no longer what it used to be, but still out there at the top. Barcelona and Madrid, both of them are a combination of local and global, good ecosystems, a lot of it from the local ecosystem. Munich, an ecosystem not a lot of people are talking about, a very high quality ecosystem on hardware and anything that has to do with that. And Helsinki in Finland. So that's a little bit about the brief in this region. Middle East, a few notable things. If you really want to relocate to the Middle East, there are only honestly 2 options that come to mind. The first one is Tel Aviv, and the second one would actually be Dubai. Dubai is a mix between the global and local Arab Middle Eastern ecosystem. It's becoming the center for Arab innovation, and definitely a very interesting place to look out for. Jerusalem is doing relatively well, but honestly, Tel Aviv has a massive gap from anything else in the Middle East, although we see some really interesting increases from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia and other locations as well. Africa, a very interesting ecosystem. All this ecosystem is very local. It caters for the local market generally. Lagos in Nigeria, this is the biggest, I think, country in Africa, is number 1. Nairobi in Kenya, a good ecosystem. A few honorable mention, Cape Town, relatively also a little bit global ecosystem, so it makes sense. Cairo is doing great, and also, by the way, Kigali in Rwanda, interesting things are happening there. The last one would be the Latin American and the Caribbean ecosystems. There is a queen here, Sao Paulo, because of the massive local market of Brazil. Not a global ecosystem, mainly catering for the Brazilian ecosystem. Mexico City, Buenos Aires, Santiago, with its excellent program of Startup Chile, and Bogota is also a very interesting upcoming location in South America. Curitiba as well, and so we have a few interesting locations in the top, and that's basically it for today. So before we move to the presentations of the ecosystem, I'll just let you know, StartupBlink is open for you to see those ranking tables. There is a report at report.startupblink.com that you can read all about what I talked about. And if you have any questions, elliot@startupblink.com, feel free. So yeah, that's it for today. I want to thank everyone for arriving for this lecture. The interesting part is now basically in 2 ecosystem presentations by I think 15 governments from around the world. We're going to have panels in the middle as well, so I hope you enjoy. And yeah, just pick the right ecosystem. It's going to make a lot of sense, and it's going to greatly